Alice, how was the rest of the golf match?
It's good. Came in 20th, I think, nationally, which is, you have to qualify to make it, which is a rigorous process, particularly in the metropolitan area where we have some of the best golfers. So
Nice. And this is your son, just to fill everyone else in, right? Your son.
yes,
Yes.
Christopher Gabriel.
Her other son, not me.
Other son.
Yes, exactly.
We'll get to that, Andrew. We'll get to that. Awesome. Well, I know we've got a bunch of good topics to cover here today. So should we get started?
Let's
Absolutely.
do it. Let's roll.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again. This is going to be another episode of Amplified Wealth. I realized, Austin, that in our haste and our first episode, we completely forgot to introduce ourselves. So I guess I will just keep it brief because we've got two guests here we need to introduce. But Austin and I are both advisors at the firm. We work with clients as well. And hopefully folks are familiar with us from the economic quarterly updates, the investment updates that we do, those webinars. And while those are meant to be more of a review of what's happened and possibly our outlook from the investment committee on what's to come, those are meant to be more academic in nature. And hopefully in listening to the other episode with Monica, folks got the vibe, if you will, that it was more casual and meant to be more conversational. So we are purposefully trying to, and as you can see with our Thanksgiving turkey hats here, trying to be seasonal and playful and fun. There you go, Alice.
There you go. Beautiful.
That one's got like a pilgrim hat on it. Is that right?
I'm not sure what it's got on there. It's got on it.
Austin, I see yours is a football player, which
I
is
went
awesome.
with the sport turkey. Yep.
There you go. So this is really meant to be more conversational, more fun. I know today we've got a great topic. I've been hearing a lot about this in the news. And I also did want to push another plug for what will be a subsidiary or subset of Amplified Wealth episodes called Amplified Wealth According to Plan. That will be hosted by Tom Farrell and Kate Fishbein. Other advisors at the firm as well. So we're trying to meet everyone, introduce everyone, but their episodes, which will be in the header, Amplified Wealth According to Plan, will be much more financially planning oriented. Okay. So hopefully we gave a little bit of background there on ourselves. Austin, I'll let you dive in on our guest today and then we can get started.
Sure. Yeah, let's get that gravy train going, if you will. So today we have Alice Gabriele. Alice is a senior portfolio manager at the firm. She has over 35 years of finance experience and has an MBA in finance with honors from Columbia Business School. She graduated magnum cum laude, from Princeton University for her undergrad degree. Alice has served on the board of the local high school booster club and coached her daughter and friends in lacrosse from kindergarten to sixth grade. For many years, she conducted alumni interviews for prospective students for Princeton University. She is currently involved with the breast cancer charity Pink Aid. Alice resides in Huntington, New York, and Naples, Florida, with her husband. They have 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. The entire family are avid athletes. Her husband is a low handicap golfer, and their younger son is the first assistant golf pro at a club in Westchester. Their older son is an accomplished skier, fly fisherman, and biker. Their daughter played college lacrosse and enjoys skiing and tennis. Alice enjoys playing tennis and biking, both in and outdoors, and dabbles in golf. Wow, a lot of words there, a lot of good stuff going on there.
Great accomplishments.
We also have Andrew Gabriele, her son. He is an associate portfolio manager at the firm. Prior to joining the firm, he was a principal news analyst at a real-time equity market news and intelligence service. Andrew earned his bachelor degree of arts in history with a certificate in American Studies from Princeton University, and he is a new father.
Congratulations.
Cue clap track. So you got to tell us, Andrew, ASL, what do we got? Does everyone remember that from like AOL? circa, what was that, in the 90s? Anyway.
I can't remember what that stands for.
But boy, girl, pounds, what are we looking at here?
So we had a little girl. My wife went for her 38-week checkup on Thursday, and her blood pressure was a little high. So I'll try to keep this short. We, were compelled to induce, and we had a little girl last Friday morning. So she's just a couple days old. We just got home from the hospital on Sunday, yesterday, about midday. Her name's Evelyn Butler Gabriele. Wow. She's going to go by Evie. She's a little peanut, 5 pounds, 5 ounces was the birth weight. And
beautiful.
Awesome.
We are just so in love. It's been, and just getting used to that new schedule of feeding every 3 hours. If I stumble over my words at all.
So you're not tired at all, huh?
Today, it's because, I had plans to, finish researching for this podcast and get it, everything all buttoned up, but certain events precluded me from doing that. So
I believe your turkey hat's still at the post office box, right?
And yes, I wanted to mention the reason I'm not participating. It's not that I do not participate in shenanigans. I love shenanigans, but I decided to replace, since you guys have pieces of flair, I'd figured since I live in Jackson, Wyoming, I would bring a Western piece of flair to the podcast. So I'm wearing my my favorite bolo tie, which is a cowboy riding I don't know if you can see that, cowboy riding a trout is the
that's great.
Oh, very nice.
on there. So there's my flair.
So I take it you're the fly fisherman in the family.
That's me. Yeah.
That's me. That's
awesome.
Love fly fishing. I haven't been able to catch anything, but love fly fishing. Yeah, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Alice, do you have any words of wisdom for Andrew?
Sleep while you can. When the baby naps, you nap.
Alice, before you jumped on, we were joking about that, how it's in theory, it sounds great, but it takes an hour to feed. They have to eat every 3 hours. It takes an hour to put them down. By the time you wind down and get to sleep, it's like you're waking back up again. So,
so if Andrew starts to drone on about a topic, it's because he's probably had no sleep.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Awesome.
So let's jump forward. So can you guys tell us a little bit about the genesis of this topic?
Sure. I had been reading an extensive piece about the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic, and it was fascinating. But the one part that really engaged me was the work from home phenomenon and what that could potentially mean for office buildings. And I just started to think about, that being a very interesting topic. And a lot of my clients had said, well, what about the office building? Is that going to be a problem? And then just real estate in general, people moving out of the cities, moving to other cities, just a whole migration. And, what could that mean for the markets and just the economy and hence the genesis of this podcast.
Yeah, the topic's been in the news a lot, right? I think we've talked a lot, Alice, about, the idea of a black swan event. Is this more of a black swan or a gray swan? And, really just the boom in that, using that terminology really since 2008. But it is something that's talked about a lot. So maybe it's not a black swan event, but it could have some implications. So we're definitely looking forward to diving into real estate as a topic here, generally speaking.
I just wanted to add that I think people started pointing to this as, a sort of potential black or gray swan. Around the time we had that, the regional bank, the SVB crisis last spring, there was a bunch of articles and research started coming out. Two professors at Columbia put out a research piece where they sort of coined this phrase, urban doom loop, and the thesis there is essentially work from home, fewer people going to offices in the city sort of hollows out the commercial core of the city. Restaurants and hotels in the cores of cities sort of start to economically struggle. Cities struggle with tax revenue, and banks that hold the loans on some of these larger office buildings perhaps struggle because they're over leveraged to, one or two localities. And perhaps that, was something that would have, a broader black swan type ripple effect within the economy. And I think, the conclusion that I hope we reach after, and we'll go through a lot of the details here, is that there's
no spoilers.
It's not so bad as that, that urban doom loop. I think the press kind of latched on to that, that moniker.
Right.
But
what a great name.
It's a huge industry. It's scary, right? Just to say that an entire industry of commercial real estate has a rocky road ahead of itself. I mean, the analogies and similarities and memories all draw back to 2008, right? With the residential real estate crisis that we saw there and how that just paralyzed the global economy. So those memories are still very fresh. We know that from working with clients. That's not a typical recession. It's not a typical phenomenon in real estate. So,
the interesting thing, though, Adam, is that the residential real estate market is actually quite strong right now.
Very strong.
One of the same reasons that the commercial real estate market is not so strong. You have, a dichotomy where we have too much office space and not enough demand. We have too much demand and not enough housing in the United States, having been underbuilt over the last 10 years. And then people also starting to, flow out to the suburbs and migrate. There's a whole dynamic going on. And then that's exacerbated by the fact that as interest rates have risen, a lot of people are not inclined to move. So, people, the only people that are moving are people like me who have no mortgage potentially and say, well, you know what, I'm going to pay cash for the next place, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right.
It's right. So let's dive into residential real estate to start. We're not going to spend as much time on this, but I think we talked about this in outlining the podcast. It's a seller's market, right? Like, just as you said, there's too few homes. Prices have risen a lot. Talk to us about this chart, either Alice or Andrew. What's
going on here? What are we looking at?
So I think what we're looking at here is kind of just the combination of, well, this is equity in real estate as a share of overall household real estate. So homeowners have seen prices increase because of this, over demand, under supply dynamic, for a number of years. And, in one way, this is a really good thing because the consumer is made stronger by the fact that they have, a bunch of equity in their home.
It's been building since 2008, right? And you see this hit a low, and what we're looking at here is the percentage of the real estate market and what value is basically in what proportion is loans outstanding versus actual equity that people own in their home. And this has significantly been rising since 2008, right? And we know that the leverage in 2008 was way too much. And really, this has been a line, straight up and to the right. For those that are listening, homeowners have been building their equity as rates have been coming down, people refinancing at lower costs, prices are going up, right, and locking in those rates. We're seeing much fewer variable rate mortgages and much more fixed rate mortgages, which we'll get into in a minute. But the chart does slightly start to tick down there at the end. Possibly, that's due to the interest rate changes that we've experienced here over the last, call it 18 months.
Right. And I think we may have another chart that shows how the housing affordability index has sort of really taken a turn to the negative side. And that's, in part because if you look at, if you compare the monthly payments on, a regular 30-year fixed rate mortgage, at a 3% rate versus, a 7 or 8% rate, hold taxes and escrow aside, they can be 50, 60, plus % higher. And if you think people are not, even with wage inflation or perhaps outpacing, inflation writ large, people are not making 50 to 60% more money. So that makes housing, incrementally much less affordable.
Yeah.
Right.
I believe we've got a chart on that.
Yeah. So we have home values going up. What's this next slide? So the I think this is what you're talking about, right?
Yes, this is what I was pointing to. So this was this is showing basically the different colors here on the screen represent different mortgages. So the the greenish down at the bottom there is all mortgages below 3%. You can see basically they were non-existent mortgages below 3% until about 2020, when the Fed took rates to zero effectively, and you could refinance at 2 3/4, 2 5/8, 2.5. That then you see this blow up to about 25% of outstanding mortgages today are under 3%. That was not heard of, really, probably in the last 40 years, I'm sure. Then you've got the blue, which is between 3 and 4%. You can see everything, that heads up to about 60%. So 60% of all mortgages are locked in at a rate under 4%. That's fantastic for the consumer, right? But it's exacerbating this problem of people not wanting to move, because we know today, if I were to go out and refinance or buy a new home, let's say I'm foregoing, I have a 2.5% mortgage on my home, I'm going to go to 6.5%, 7% most likely. It's a massive jump in the cost of financing that home.
Right. And why would you move? Right. That's, I'm almost waiting for the mortgage brokers out there to say, you know what, we'll let you keep your rate and you just move it to the new house. Right. Because you look at all these mortgage brokers, they were making a lot of money with all this refinancing activity. Now they're not doing as hot.
Absolutely.
Is that a possibility? Is that something that they're in the industry, they're actually talking about? That would be
I haven't heard
interesting.
of that. That would be interesting.
It would be. I don't know. I have no idea, but leave it to the money makers to find new ways to make money.
Yeah, the
Exactly.
good point. But
as long as they charge a fee.
But we have one thing we have seen is that the builders who are building that have this inventory that they're trying to move, is they, in order to sort of make up for how hard it is for people to afford homes in the class that that they were shopping for, builders are offering more and more incentives to new buyers,
And they're buying down the interest rates for them. Mm-hmm.
which is really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if you can get a better deal on the house, or pay up a little bit for the house, but have them, buy down a couple points on the mortgage, maybe over the long term, if it is a longer term home that you're buying, is going to be worth it for the buyer. So again, we're seeing another instance of why this is a seller's market in the residential real estate, residential category of real estate. So what other charts do we have? What else did you guys bring today?
There's something on inventory levels. I believe that's next, where you can see that, residential inventory levels have gone down. Let's say they peaked in 2019, 20-ish, right? So that's just the factual representation of what we were talking about as, low inventory, high demand.
Yeah,
right.
I think with a lot of these charts, I'm noticing that there was, right when the Fed started hiking rates and mortgage rates started really exploding, there were all these reversals of the trend. And then yields have started to come down of late because the end is in sight for the Fed hiking. And you're seeing things, despite rates being much higher, the anticipation of lower rates in the future is causing this again to be, longer term rates to come down a little bit. And we're seeing those trends that quickly reverse, go right back to where they were. Inventories, everything was getting scooped up the last couple of weeks with, mortgage rates coming from 8%. I think they hit down, below 7%. I'm seeing now in the market. It's just that incremental jump. But then also people might be, look, there was probably some sticker shock at first, right? Last year, and people didn't really want to make moves. And now they're starting to realize this is just how the market's going to be. I have to adjust. I'm going to have to sacrifice something to fit a home into my budget.
Right. And some of it has to do, I think, with getting more comfortable with mortgage rates aren't going to always be this high, right? Sure, maybe I lock in a 6 or 8% mortgage rate now, but if you think rates are going to go down over the next, 6 to 12 months, even, maybe even a little longer, you might be willing to pay that higher mortgage rate for that 6 to 12 months, knowing that, rates are going to come down. You can always refinance.
So, guys, as a newer entrant into the advisory industry, I kind of have a question for all three of you. How are conversations with clients going in terms, whether they be buyers or sellers in this housing market? What are we hearing? How are they navigating, decisions in this rate environment? And especially, I know, Alice, you wanted to touch on this. How are first-time home buyers? How are the children of some of your clients who, are maybe my age or a little younger, doing as they, within this environment of reduced affordability?
Well, it's very interesting. I have had several clients this year, 4 or 5, request some cash so they could give it to their kids or grandkids to help them put a larger down payment so they can now afford the monthly payments of their homes. Because rather than scale back on what they wanted, they're helping them now so they can still get what they want. And so if their mortgage is less and they're paying a higher interest rate, they keep the monthly payment where they can afford it. But it's happened many times, which is, I find, very interesting.
And I've definitely seen a number of articles, Wall Street Journal. I definitely saw one about this phenomenon of, people needing to help the next generation with, down payments for homes. And I guess the next logical question that follows from that is, the parents that are giving up that money, probably, possibly from their retirement accounts. Do we see any deleterious effects on, the outlook for their retirements, or are these people with means?
The people that requested, my clients that requested money, it shouldn't affect them. They have enough.
Well, that's good to hear.
That's definitely a question we are getting is, can I do this? Not so much I'm going to do this, and then us coming to them and saying, no, this is not advisable. Right. We're making sure it works within their plan. But at the end of the day, too, we build out these plans with a lot of cushion and wiggle room where, we need an asset pool that we would much rather have someone pass away with money in the bank than start bouncing checks before they actually die, right? Exactly. From a planning perspective. So,
right. And using our software, we could tell people, hey, you had an 87% probability of success that you're not going to run out of your money. If you help your son or your daughter out with this house, that may drop you to an 85% probability of success. Or maybe it doesn't impact it much at all, depending on, the value of, what they want to put down relative to, their asset base. But we can go in and we could tell them, or we can even help them, advise them on, what, X amount, that would be a good amount that will still keep you on plan. But there's a lot of cool conversations we're having with clients around that.
Absolutely.
I would say the biggest conversation I'm having with newer home buyers or folks looking to, children of clients, things of that nature, is encouraging them to not think of their home the way they think about stocks and as an investment.
Right.
Even if they're just buying it short term, it's a starter home. They're going to put some work into it. With this stock, you never want to buy something 10% over the price it's currently trading at, right? It's publicly traded. These are very liquid investments liquid assets that we're dealing with. With a home, they're not liquid, and you get a level of utility by living in the home. You don't live in your stocks that you buy, okay? The stocks don't determine where your kids go to school. So paying up to get into an area where you can see your kids getting a good education, or, buying a home with an extra bedroom and paying up for that you can afford to live there for a lot longer. I don't think overpaying in those situations is nearly as bad as buying a stock 10% more than you should.
Right. And overpaying within your means.
Within your means, of course.
I would say also that if you're planning on being someplace for a short period of time, at this point, I may rent versus own. But like you're saying, if it's somebody, you've got young kids and you're moving into a neighborhood that has a good school district, you plan to be there for a long period of time. Typically, over a long period of time, you'll make money in real estate. Unless you've significantly overpaid. But I know my first house, 5-year ownership, dead even. Second house, tripled. And owned it for 20 years.
Over what, 30 years? Yeah.
Yeah, 25 years over.
Yeah, I mean, because of the land too, real estate's a good inflation hedge. So plenty of reasons. Look, it can be a good investment. I guess what I'm saying is I'm encouraging folks to not look at it that way and realize that when they buy a home, it's a lot more.
It has a different utility, like you said. It has utility, whereas a stock,
As much as I would love to live inside all of my Apple shares,
right? And if you buy your home thinking it's a retirement investment, right? What are you going to do when you retire? How do you tap into that? You just sell your house, then where do you live, right? So for the most part, a lot of people, their primary residence really isn't a good retirement investment. Sure, it's a good utility, and you may make money on it on the other end, but we would encourage people not to treat it as a retirement investment.
In the metaverse, you may be able to live within your Apple shares somehow. I don't know how all that works, but
we'll need to do a digital asset and cryptocurrency episode at some point.
So more than I.
This chart's interesting. It really shows what we've been talking about, is that housing affordability has really decreased this year and last year.
Note that it says based on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So, it's making the calculation that's driving, this index based on, the size of those monthly payments, essentially.
Yeah, but even, okay, so this chart, I'll just describe it for those that are listening, really since it starts in the 80s, but really since the 80s through the mid 2000s, houses were getting, this is more affordable over time as rates were coming down. Right.
As the line goes up, you're able to. It's showing more affordability.
Yes, right. And then there's this sort of bottoming process. Houses became less affordable in the run up to 06, 07, that real estate crash, and then you can see this line just spikes up here after right around 2006, 2007, right, in the real estate and financial crisis that ensued from there. And housing was getting more, even though rates were coming down through the mid 2000s, which would counterintuitively, you would think that would make houses more affordable. Prices were rising so much that they were actually slightly becoming less affordable. So it's a combination of prices and the 30-year mortgage rates. Exactly. And we've just seen the chart here just crater really since about 2021, when it was evident the Fed needed to start aggressively raising rates to combat inflation.
Right. And I guess I would just throw in too, when it comes to housing prices, 2020 or COVID, that was a real turning point in how we look at our house. There's a lot of people who are now either fully remote working from home or, working from home 20% of their regular work week or more, right? And so now we have homes that aren't just homes, right? They're also offices. So your utility, what you're getting out of your home, is actually going up for most people. So, it makes sense that the price would then therefore go up.
That's a good point.
Anecdotally, where I live in Jackson, Wyoming, obviously, very desirable vacation type destination, we had a huge influx of, remote workers. We like to say they're all from California. We don't have anything against people from California. You're all good. You're all welcome here. But yeah, our prices went through the roof with COVID, because people want to live, somewhere where they can play outside and enjoy the great outdoors, and their office is right there at their house too. So yeah.
So this has been good for homeowners. I think talking about COVID and the pandemic is an excellent segue into the other aspect of real estate we're going to talk about, which is the commercial aspect of real estate. And COVID and the pandemic and this whole work from home environment and shift that we're talking about has really spooked a lot of the narrative around commercial real estate. I I used to live in New York City and commuted into an office every single day. I've since moved back home to Boston, but moving out to the suburbs was kind of already in the cards and in our thought process with a baby on the way at the time. But I think this chart here, I'd love for Andrew, Alice, one of you to walk us through what this chart is, because it puts into perspective the entire real estate market, right? And I think what we're going to dive into in the next section here is this urban doom loop, this the saying
so scary sounding
about.
Urban doom loop.
Well, hopefully we can provide some reason and light to what has been painted as a pretty dark topic.
I think what's important to realize is that the commercial real estate market is retail, multifamily, industrial, and office. I mean, roughly speaking, and I guess development loans, et cetera. And, whereas retail's done okay because consumer is still spending. So the retail space has done, multifamily obviously has done well because there's a lack of housing availability. Industrial, with the whole, boom in e-commerce post-COVID and during COVID, the data centers, the logistics facilities, the warehousing, that's done fairly well, and that will shift if the economy gets slower. But it's the real estate market that, the office real estate market is the one that concerned us, and, because of the whole work from home phenomena. And as you can see, it's not a huge part of the commercial real estate market. It's 13.3%. But, it is still 13.3%, and it's centered in the cities. So, we just want to bring that, to the forefront in terms of what a large market, 4.7 trillion.
It's also worth mentioning that, a even smaller portion of that small proportion that is in that investor-owned office space is owned by, or the loans are held by, banks. And the whole urban doom loop hypothesis that we sort of introduced earlier, because the regional banking mini crisis had happened last spring, was going on at the same time that was kind of being circulated. They kind of got conflated together, and rightly so. Like, it's logical that the banks that hold the loans on within one region might be exposed to large office tenants facing financial duress, but they're an even smaller portion.
Before we get into the loans, let's look at the landscape for office real estate. What I believe there's a chart in here that talks about where occupancy rates have been heading in multiple cities. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump to that, but I just want to emphasize Andrew's point is, according to Vanguard, they're estimating that this area of the market that we're concerned about represents, less than 2% of the market. So when we talk about real estate, we really need to be specific on what real estate we're talking about, where the issue is. And, what I'm seeing on this screen, at least, is telling me is, even if this we did see a fair amount of disruption here, it doesn't look like it would be a systemic event where it would disrupt the rest of the markets, unless I have that wrong. But that's when I look at this chart, that's what I see.
That's exactly, one of the conclusions that we drew from this. And I think what you have to really drill down to is who could be most vulnerable, or which cities could be most vulnerable. And I think the next chart, if I'm not correct, maybe, this just shows the decline in occupancy rates in commercial real estate. And obviously it's most pronounced, or, it's an outlier. The office space is really bad. You see a little tail off here in retail, multifamily, I guess. I guess that's multifamily, industrial, but this looks okay. This does not look good, this office space.
At the bottom here. Yeah, so this chart, for those listening, this is looking at the ebbs and flows of the occupancy rate in U.S. office properties. And it breaks it down into office, retail, multifamily, and industrial, like we talked about on the last slide. And, multifamily still looking like it's around the levels of really the last decade, right? Industrial seems to be at better occupancy rates, off the highs, but better occupancy rates than all through 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Even retail as well is really at an all-time high and we haven't seen any retail occupancy rates tail off. But the office is the outlier here. Not only is it lower always than the rest in terms of occupancy rates, but it's really been declining steadily, and the trend looks different since the pandemic. Right?
You know what's interesting here is the 2000s is the peak for office space in this chart here. I wonder if that has anything to do with the internet and it becoming easier to work from home, starting in the early 2000s. I'm speculating here. I have no idea, but I know the internet started in the 60s, right? It took time for it to develop. I wonder, that's when you start to see it kind of break away from everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a valid observation.
Yeah. And I'd like to point out too that I think that this chart might even be slightly stale. So this shows occupancy rates. The inverse of that kind of is vacancy rates. And I've seen a few different figures recently, but the vacancy rate for U.S. offices I've seen quoted as high as 21% currently, which sounds like, a very, very big figure. But as we start to sort of break down the office space, we kind of see a bifurcated picture, right? In terms of a lot of office space is doing just fine in terms, they have much higher occupancy. And that's, those Class A type buildings for which there's a lot of demand. Buildings, that were built in like the 80s and 90s that are, a little bit lower tier, lower quality, fewer amenities, maybe don't meet the new ESG demands of a lot of the tenants who are the ones that are in more trouble. Maybe they're not located, as close to, in the most desirable locales. Those are the ones that are struggling now.
Location, as they say. So that can apply to commercial real estate as well. I know that's, that was the most important thing for buying a home. But so let's look at that. What's the next slide here?
Yeah, the mid-sized cities having some of the highest office delinquency rates, which, as Andrew had mentioned before, there's a high percentage of loans in commercial real estate that are done by regional and local banks, particularly in the mid-sized cities. So where I would see some maybe fissures in the foundation is potentially some fallout to the regional and local banks if they have really a lot of loans outstanding in some of the cities that have been impacted the most.
Yeah.
And the cities
some of these
really how to address it.
Some of the smaller and mid-sized cities, a lot of the tenants within their urban cores are leveraged to like one or two industries. So you notice towards the top of this list, Hartford, Connecticut. When I think Hartford, Connecticut, I think of the insurance industry. Do we think that the insurance industry has been hit hard by the, shift to work from home? Absolutely. You can sell insurance from, your desk in your house, Teamsing or Zooming with clients. So, it's logical that, those cities are the ones that are facing the most financial distress from the work from home phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right. There's sort of these micro economies in some of these mid-sized cities that have supported, or maybe, they were older industries that boomed in the 80s, 90s, something like that. That's what I think of when I think of Hartford or, a Charlotte. Some of these other cities on this list.
Anecdotally, I bumped into somebody on the golf course watching my son who was from Hartford, and I said, "Oh, you have a high office delinquency rate," and he said, Hartford's been struggling for a while. It has high crime. The poverty's been bad, so it probably was more susceptible, as Andrew had alluded to. There's sort of this bifurcated impact locational weakness, functional obsolescence. They had older buildings. I used to cover Hartford when I was at Goldman, and there's these insurance buildings, these huge buildings. They were really built up, like you said. They're probably half occupied because you can work from home to do the operational aspects of insurance as well as the probably the selling. It's interesting.
Right. What a great way to what a great way to start a conversation. Oh, you're from Harvard. But I guess this is also this is technology disrupting again, right? We're talking about a lot of older school businesses and how they managed their business. Working in an older school way. The technology was there to work from home, and it took something like COVID really to push everyone off the cliff and say, wow, we can actually do this. And what you see over and over and over again, whether it's in the U.S. or any market out there, whenever technology disrupts something, usually something fills the gap, right? So, will these mid-sized cities, are they going to be put in a horrible spot? I don't know, but could something emerge from this technological disruption that helps kind of fill in the void? It's very possible if you look at history.
As with everything, there's an equilibrium that needs to be reached, right? When things get too far out of whack, they will come back towards the middle, right? So you've seen it with other regional areas that go in and out of favor as well. And I'm sure
you can see it with technology. I mean, it got so expensive to live in California that a lot of the technology companies migrated elsewhere, and particularly Texas. And so it was more affordable for them to build, more affordable for their employees to work. Things have a way of equaling out.
Yeah, and I think that this is a good transition to talking about one of the sort of antidotes to this urban doom loop hypothesis that gets brought up a lot is, well, there's oversupply of lower tier office buildings, and we talked earlier about the undersupply of housing. Well, could we repurpose some of these older office buildings into housing? There's a couple problems with that. A lot of these big large office floor plans it's very costly, if not outright impossible, to repurpose them to housing because they don't necessarily have, if you
natural light
if you chop them up into little apartments, they don't necessarily have windows. The beams are such that redoing the electricity and plumbing to make it into apartments is difficult. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was last week, where they actually have started hollowing out the cores of some of these big office buildings to create like inner courtyards to create more window space to make more apartments. And we've seen cities, I know Boston is one of them, Adam, where the cities themselves are starting to provide incentives to builders and developers to sort of start this redeveloping, repurposing process.
DC, a bunch of cities have started to do it because they see the writing on the wall, like what can we do to help? And there's a bunch of issues though. I mean, the ideal building is smaller, older, empty, and in essence lower quality, like it's ready to be, and because of the smaller floor plan, it's better designed for conversion. But you've got
older office buildings, Alice, with smaller floor plans are the ones that are better candidates for repurposing for housing. Yeah,
exactly. Right. But the ideal candidate is only like really 1% of the office space in the country is really an ideal candidate for this. So last year there was another article in the Wall Street Journal that there were only like 3,575 apartments created from conversion, and that was less than 1% of the newly constructed apartments created last year in the country. Right. So it's very incremental at this point, but it can help. I mean,
Excellent.
Right. Should we hop to the next slide?
I think that sets the stage for the issue with commercial real estate is it's not the oversupply necessarily, but a lot of the debt tied to, right? This was a big, Andrew, as you talked about, this really, the genesis of this kind of started in the banking crisis that we had, the mini banking crisis, I'll say, this past March. Talk to us about what we're looking at here on this slide and where the concern starts to creep in?
Yeah. So in the commercial real estate space writ large, there's currently more than $5 trillion dollars of debt. And more than half of that, 2.75 trillion of commercial mortgages are slated to mature by 2027, and about 1 trillion of those through the end of 2024. So heavy volume of commercial real estate loans reaching maturity, and those are going to need to be refinanced at higher rates. Couple that with what this slide is showing, which is that a lot of the payers of those loans are already paying higher rates because of a higher and higher proportion of late of those loans have been floating rate. So their payments have been increasing as the Fed has been raising rates.
Yeah, occupancy is coming down. We have floating rates, which are much more standard practice and common in commercial real estate versus residential real estate, right? We talked about how 60% of all loans in residential real estate are fixed under 4%. That is very much not the case here.
Right.
So this slide is talking about the share of commercial mortgages that are floating rate. And you can see they have been, the bottom of this chart is really 2010, 11, 12, but it's been pretty much steadily rising over the last couple of years, to the point where the last 2 years, 21, 22, even 19 and 18 were above 30%, approaching 40% of loans being tied to floating rates. So now that that was great back then when rates were low,
right.
But now we're in a higher rate environment where these mortgages are coming due, like you were talking about originally, Andrew. I think that's on the next slide, Austin, if you want to jump ahead. This is presenting a big problem here. Exactly. This is what you were talking about, Andrew, correct?
Yep. And
yes,
and we kind of already, it kind of explained how, listen, that large commercial real estate, like those numbers that, some of the doom loop articles and research recordings, like, oh, there's this huge volume of loans coming due. Not all, a very small proportion of that is actually these troubled office buildings that we're talking about. So, this is an issue, but sort of take it with a grain of salt, because a lot of the loans that are going to be refinanced are in spaces, like industrial, data center, et cetera, where, they'll be able to afford, these payments at these higher rates.
And we have to assume rates are also heading back down at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe not all the way down to zero and where they were, but it's possibly bad right now. But depending on where rates head in the next 6 months, even, we saw peak 10-year yields hit 5% in the end of September. They're back down to 4.6, right? So we've seen a big decline already. 10% decline in longer term rates, where this may not be an issue. It is an issue now because rates are rising, but maybe if rates are falling over the next couple of years, that's not as big of an issue as it could have been.
So for our listeners, can you walk us through why is this important that commercial, that we're looking at maturities? What's the big deal about, more maturities coming due?
Alice, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, I mean, it could cause a problem if the occupancy rates are lower and their cash flow is not going to be such to sustain, a higher interest rate. If assuming they had fixed rate, and even if they have floating rate and they see their occupancy coming down, they're in a potentially, less than desirable situation, and that would happen with certain buildings. It's not going to happen everywhere. There's a really high demand for high quality buildings in some of the cities. And as we said, sustainable, and the prices are actually going up. But there's going to be some pockets that are going to suffer from this. It's also because, why hasn't this doom loop happened yet? One reason is a lot of the cities still have some stimulus money. Two, a lot of the loans and the leases are coming due over the next 18 to 24 months, that's where we could see, some how it's going to play out. So,
Right.
that's the issue with these loan maturities. I mean, particularly if these were not floating and they're going from fixed to floating, that's going to be an issue.
It is important to note, though, that some of these tenants are so large that as a proportion of what their lenders of their lenders book, that they're willing to work with these lenders to restructure their loans so that they'll be able to make these payments, because because these are lower quality buildings where it would cost a lot to repurpose it, the banks don't want to take possession of these buildings. So
Right.
There's
Right.
a lot of work around, just because these loans are maturing in this in this shorter window doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to precipitate a broader crisis. Like, there's a number of workarounds that are in place. And I also wanted to mention just really quickly that there are some signs that people are starting to come back to offices. Utilization has been ticking up. A number of prominent law firms have instituted mandatory 3 and 4 day work week in office policies of late. So, we're still there. The initial shock from the pandemic we're still reaching a new equilibrium, right? So,
The about face of some of these companies is quite striking. You've seen it,
Absolutely.
I have friends who, from my days out in San Francisco who work at Google and all these other companies. One of my closest friends, she moved back home to Maine because Google went fully remote, and that was their and then now she's been forced to move back to California 2 years later, and it's like, what a whirlwind for her. But that's not rare in this space, and there really wasn't a drastic about face. So maybe the trend of these occupancy rates going down, or the vacancies going up, is in the process of bottoming as we speak.
Let's quantify that a little bit. Just 9% of job postings on LinkedIn were listed as remote in July and August, and that's down from over 20% of jobs that were posted in early 2022. So I mean, that's a pretty significant readjustment back towards not necessarily pre-pandemic norm, but back in that direction.
Yeah. Right. Talk about upsetting. I hate moving to begin with. I can't imagine moving back to the East Coast because the company went to this remote policy, and then them saying, "Oh, you know what? We changed our mind. Come back."
That would be
truly awful.
What I think is the most compelling statistic, though, is that The Economist had an article in June which said that people are 18% less productive working from home. Now, in a capitalistic society, yep. Excuse me. I think that's going to be the driver. To me, if efficiency drives everything, it should.
Well, Alice, you've worked remote for a long, time before it was cool, as they would say. But that's a really surprising statistic. You said 18% less productive working from home.
That's what The Economist said. It was interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And you have to remember, there's different people. I mean, I've worked from home for a long time. I've worked from hospitals getting chemo. I mean, I'm used to working anywhere. And I'm also neurotic. I don't know if everybody's as neurotic as I am.
I think about my own work day and the days that I'm in a home office here. I typically work, most Fridays and some Mondays from here. But it takes me 45 minutes to an hour to commute each way. That's time I could otherwise be spending working. I don't have to wait in line at the cafe that's in the offices for my sandwich, or go to this, I could just run upstairs and grab a bite of leftovers, pop it in the microwave, and eat at my desk here. So, there's a lot of time saved.
And money.
That
because I save a lot of money eating leftovers for lunch.
But that statistic is interesting to me. I'm not going to say it's not true. Maybe for me it's not true,
Right.
or for others it's not true. But that's eye-opening. That really is to me.
From talking to my business owner clients, I wonder if some of that comes from that next generation coming up to the ranks, because, you know, what I'm hearing from them is, how do we keep mentoring that next generation? We can't if they're not in the office. And while, you know, my partners work very well out of the office, if the younger generation's coming in, but the partners aren't coming in, why does the younger generation even care about coming in, right? They're coming in for that mentorship or to get those relationships to help them move up the ranks. So I think it might be a little bit more complex, but it's interesting.
It may be a generational thing. I mean, there definitely are people who think that there's a younger generation that doesn't work as hard as the older generation. But these are statistics, so I say
tale as old as time. I feel like every 10 years,
Exactly.
we start hating on the next generation. But
Right.
should we move to the next slide here?
Sure. Apologize for the cough.
That's all good. So what do we have going on here?
Well, again, it's just the same thing. The refinancing is elevated over the next couple of years. It's really just shows a breakdown by year, banks, insurance companies, all the different originators of loans, and how much is coming due in every year. And it just looks like 2024 is a big year, 23 also, but 24 is a big year in terms of refinancing. And I think that's what most of the people that have been talking about this, that's a year that we really have to watch in terms of how this all plays out.
Was there a phenomenon, like, is there a schedule at which these loans are typically refinanced? Like, why is it that these 2 years have a larger share of refinancing needs? Right.
I am not 100%
What
sure.
happened 5 or 10 years ago, 7 years ago? I think commercial real estate's on a 7-year schedule. Is that right? So, you know, what happened? I wonder what happened 7 years ago that caused this bump here
People
today.
locked in these great rates, and they said, I'm going to lock them in as long as possible. That
could
probably
be.
happened.
They wanted to give us something to talk about, I guess.
And
There you go, Austin.
So let's keep flipping through here. So let's talk about this slide. What's going on here? For our listeners, not only our viewers. If we could just describe what we see on the screen.
Ed, you want to take this, or
You go ahead. This is where my research
Just-
took a hit with the baby.
okay? So I'll take this one.
I don't remember this
just
one.
For those who are listening versus watching, it just shows that the regional local banks are big providers of loans, particularly to the retail sector and the office sector, other sectors as well. But just in terms of the office sector, it's about 30%. So in terms of the cities, those mid-sized cities that I thought, predominantly were regional and local banks, if we see some cracks in their infrastructure there, pardon the phrase, but then there could be some fallout to the regional and local banks.
Right. Which is really a shift that we're seeing in other places too, where the regional and local banks, are running into issues and are being saved by the larger banks, right? And there are a lot of regional and local banks out there. So I don't know that I necessarily mind, seeing some consolidation there.
Exactly. That's how we play. I really do.
I just want to take a minute. I don't know if there are more slides we want to cover that we've left off, but I think the comparison of commercial and residential real estate, the way it boils down is we have a demand problem with one area and we have a supply problem with another.
Exactly.
Right. So the residential real estate, like we talked about in the beginning, it's a seller's market, right? Commercial real estate, it's much more of a buyer's market. And a lot of that's because of the undersupply of residential properties available. And now what seems like an oversupply of commercial properties available, right? So that's more of a demand issue, which would be more concerning if we started to see cracks in the economy, I would imagine as well. Right.
Agreed. Absolutely.
So, not that residential real estate would not also take a hit if there were cracks in the economy. If we were to see a recession or something like that, unemployment starts rising. But it seems like it would be more of an issue on the commercial side. Is that fair to say, you think?
I agree.
I would agree.
I totally agree.
Right. So what do we have here? We have 2 more slides left. Do we want to talk about these, or where are we here?
I think the point here is just that, just while there are, commercial properties, probably some of these lower quality offices that are in distress, and we see, in the last few years, upticks in the dollar volume of those buildings that are in distress or in foreclosure. It's still very low by historical standards. And I think that this is just us trying to underscore the point that, there's a long way to go before we have, a big problem, like a black swan type problem, like we had on the residential side, like in 2008.
And even here it shows that there was, distress in commercial real estate in 9, 10, 8, 9, 10 rising, and it went down. Down a lot. And then in 2020, obviously with the pandemic, we started to see a rise, but it hasn't gone up that much, and it's much lower than it was in 2010 so far.
Right.
So,
it's almost like these distress levels took a step up in 2020 when businesses presumably went under. Absolutely. And people were forced to work remote, and people, foreclosed on their debt, basically their real estate, commercial real estate loans. And it hasn't really budged since, right? It's been at the same dollar level since. And I wonder how much of this is just high inflation too, right? This is in real terms, or, inflation's taken a big jump over the last 3 years too. So these levels being at the same dollar value, to me, it doesn't seem like it's nearly as bad as people are making it out to be in the news, I guess is my point.
I think what you'll see is that, cities that were suffering even before, like, for example, Hartford, there was a lot of poverty to begin with. So it wasn't that desirable to go into the office. And you can work from home in that industry. There will be instances like that they had some problems beforehand, and this exacerbated the problems. And these cities will really need to do something different. Like, potentially we have a government program like the model cities in the 70s that addressed poverty and issues in unique cities.
I feel bad. We keep picking on Connecticut.
Yeah, I don't know how we got stuck on Hartford. That was probably my fault. Sorry, Hartford.
No, well, it was actually because it was one of the highest, and because when I met this guy and he said he was from Hartford, I said, "Oh, you got problems."
Well, my family's from Connecticut. I've got nothing against the Connecticut.
No, it's a beautiful
I don't know
state.
what do you call people from Connecticut? Anyways,
that's a good question. Connecticuters?
Cuddies.
Cuddies. Okay. Hopefully, there's not some slur associated with that.
No. What? Cuddies fish or something?
So to summarize, we're not seeing that same scare that the media is talking about. Do I have that right?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think this is definitely a situation that has to be monitored, and particularly in the areas where it's most pronounced, and those cities need to address it. And maybe there'll be federal funding for those particular cities. But the statistic that it's, office owned are 13% of commercial real estate, and then only 13% of those that Vanguard quoted really would be in trouble in a down economy. I mean, that's still, like you said, it's a small percentage. But, I think they'll be shifting like any other disruptor in the economy. The marginal player is going to have to shift. Something's going to have to happen.
Right. And the world goes around, right? This is something we've seen before. We don't see major disruption. We don't see a major disruption to the overall economy, but we do see shifts, right?
And the most important thing to note is employment is still very strong. So that's a really good thing here in terms of keeping this from becoming more of a problem.
Right. The economy approaches this sort of, this shift, this repurposing of, certain pieces of the commercial real estate sector from a place of strength. The consumer has strength. Even within the office subsector of commercial real estate, it's bifurcated. So, the properties that may face trouble, is a even smaller proportion. And then, like I mentioned before, there are workarounds. The tenants and the lenders can work together. There's, repurposing can play a role. Whether that, how limited that is, that remains to be seen. Depends on the locality. Depends on, the subsidies that localities might want to provide for that. But I think that when you look at the whole global picture, when I'll admit, when I first read, the first article I read about this urban doom loop hypothesis, I was like, wow. The reason I kept reading about it was because I was legitimately worried about this. I was like, this could be a big threat to the economy. Like it makes sense. People are, the cores of these cities will get hollowed out. They'll have no tax revenue. The loans will all go bad, and it could have a big trickle down effect. And but the more you kind of look at it and think about it, I think the less onerous it becomes.
Right. So I think that puts a nice bow on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's with most things in the financial world and in our world is, once people start talking about it, it's priced in. Once you start digging a little deeper, it's not so bad as it once appeared. And
hyperbolic headlines, sell newspapers.
Yep. And ad space, right? That's what they're in the business for, is making money.
Exactly.
Not necessarily reporting the truth.
Exactly.
Or painting the truth in the proper way.
Right. So you ready to move on to what's new?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, and also, Adam,
just say this has been fantastic. I enjoyed reading through your notes and looking through some slides in preparation for this, and I hope it painted a better picture than what the media is portraying. To your point, Andrew, about the hyperbolic headlines that we often see on this topic, and this has been awesome. I hope you guys had fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
I just found it a very fascinating topic, and I wanted to learn more about it. And
clients are asking about it too, right?
Yeah, that's
right. So I also realized, Adam, we're taking this whole talking heads role pretty seriously today.
You really are.
Gobble, gobble.
With our turkeys.
So what's new? So at the end of all of our podcast episodes, we like to ask, something a little not financially related, if you will. Andrew, Alice, anything you've been reading lately, hobbies you're into, books, TV shows, anything that our viewers might learn a thing or two about or be able to watch and enjoy as well?
So obviously we talked about the baby. That's obviously the big thing going on in my life. But I do have some, I do have some culturally relevant stuff to bring. Have any of you guys seen Killers of the Flower Moon yet?
Oh, I have not, but it looks great.
It looks really good.
Scorsese?
Yeah, that's the Leonardo DiCaprio. 3.5 hours long, apparently. I have not seen it. But I'm a big, I love to read the book first. So I've been reading Killers of the Flower Moon, and the name of the author is going to escape me, but super interesting. You can see how it was great material for a movie. The premise here is
David Graham.
Thank you. Thank you for the quick draw. But the Osage Indians, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right because I've only read it. They held this land that oil got discovered on, and every member of the tribe received, these head rights, and they were like the wealthiest people per capita, like in the early part of the last century of anywhere in the world. Wow. And they basically, there were some, people, they kept getting murdered, and there was, this plot to, I don't want to spoil too many of the details, but, people were at tale as old as time. The white man was trying to, to steal from them. And they lived in fear for, over a decade that each of them might be next. in this this awful conspiracy.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see the movie. It's also very much about
You
the
have to watch
investigation
the
into
movie
it.
instead of reading the book. Without with the baby, you might not have any more time to read.
Seeing as we're doing feedings every 3 hours and each one takes an hour, I don't know how I'm going to watch a 3.5 hour movie. Definitely not going to the movie theater.
The
So
book's probably like 30, so whatever. Oh, God. Well, it's funny that one of my favorite shows that I'm rewatching is Call the Midwife, given the birth of your baby. It's set in London in like the late 50s and 60s, and it's about these midwives that really attend to all the births in that area. There wasn't enough hospitals and whatever, and I just find it fascinating because it's historical. I do have to use the subtitles sometimes because some of the British I just cannot the language I can't understand, and there's so many idioms and so many funny things that are said. But I just it's something I've watched lately. I've read a couple of books. One is Lessons in Chemistry, which is now a Netflix series as well. That's
Hannah's reading that right now. She just picked up the book.
Yeah, I read it and then I am watching the series as well. It's good.
What's that about?
It's about a chemist, a female chemist. Again, back in the day, and she wasn't really recognized for her skills, and she was, sort of treated like an assistant chemistry person. Anyway, so, but she also was a great cook because she could understand how all the, things mesh and whatever. And so she was asked to do a cooking show, and that's all I'll say. Because I don't want to spoil.
That's on Apple TV, I believe, right?
I can't remember where much. It might be.
I think that. Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been watching Bodies, and when I look for in a show, and this is on Netflix. The show's called Bodies, and what I love in a show is a mystery. I love working my brain trying to figure out what the next move is, what's the next big reveal, and then I also like to be kind of taken to another place in time, and I think Bodies does both pretty well. It's I think it's a British show on Netflix, but what happens is there's 3 points in time in history a body shows up on the street dead, and it follows 3 different detectives trying to solve the murder.
Oh, interesting.
And it kind of moves into one at the very end. You really have to be into sci-fi, or at least appreciate a little bit of sci-fi to like it, but I loved it. It was really good. Kind of took me to different parts of time. Really working that brain. I'm very good at understanding or guessing what's going to come next, and it definitely had me for a loop at the end. So I would definitely.
You'd like my wife then.
That.
She always knows what's happening. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then it happens, and I'm like, oh, come on! Like, how did you know that?
Yeah, it's like one of the most useless superpowers ever. But it's good. It's good. Adam, how about you?
I'm glad I get to go last, so everyone can have the next month to judge me until our next podcast. But I'm a sucker for reality TV, and we've got a connection to some of the director and staff of the show, of The Bachelor and Bachelorette and all that. But I've been watching The Golden Bachelor, which is it's phenomenal. Yes, and
Maybe I'll
for anyone that's familiar or not familiar, I hope everyone's familiar, but. The Bachelor and The Bachelorette are these dating shows where there's one guy or one gal, the Bachelor, Bachelorette, and there's like 30 other gals or guys trying to date this one person, and they juggle these relationships, eliminate people throughout the way. The Golden Bachelor, they have gone to different countries and done this. The Golden Bachelor's older. He's a gentleman in his 70s. His wife tragically passed away a number of years ago, and he is looking for new love. And it's so refreshing because these 25-year-olds that go on The Bachelor, Bachelorette, they don't know what love is. They don't know. They're not old enough. They've not experienced enough. They're just looking for their person, right? Which I don't want to fault them. Everyone's entitled to that, to find love. But it's really a unique and refreshing perspective from someone who's been there and done that and is approaching this a lot differently. The conversations are much more wholesome, as you'd probably imagine. No one's there for like clout or social media followers or anything like that. So It's sappy. I'm sorry, but it's great. It's great. So
You're kind of selling me on it.
You are selling it.
You know, we've got a couple shows we watch, my wife and I, and this is a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah. What bothers me about some reality TV or The Bachelor, other versions of it, is it seems fake along the way, right? But what you're telling me is, there might be some roots. There might be some extra depth in the Golden Bachelor.
Yeah, part of the allure of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette for me is the fact that it's so obviously fake at times, right? It's almost a joke to be able to watch and laugh at. You're not laughing with them, you're laughing at them, right? With this, I feel like I'm on their team, and I'm rooting for them for the first time in many, many years of watching this show.
There you go. So, they're very good. So we gave you guys some real estate insights, also some insights on some good shows and books out there to read. I thought it was a very good show. Did you guys have fun?
Did.
Yeah, I think that went great. Look how much time we filled.
We filled a lot of time. Yeah. So thank you, listeners, for staying with us. We really appreciate your time, as always. I will plug the other Amplified Wealth or other version of the Amplified Wealth. What's that called again, Adam?
According to plan. Amplified Wealth according to plan. Yep.
So we appreciate your time. We look forward to your feedback. Please like and share and follow us on whatever your preferred podcasting app is, or on YouTube. We love to hear from you. Love to see you sharing and that interaction. And look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
To yours and your family.
Take care.